Hi, and welcome back to Old School. Today, we're going to be kind of in the emotional and spiritual quadrants, those classes, because that's where this subject is so important and where it resides. Our teacher today is Whitney Akin, author of Overlooked, Finding Your Worth When You Feel All Alone. And that, I feel, is such a topic, especially coming out of COVID, and just the way that social media can create isolation. Whitney's heart is to see and celebrate the purpose and potential of the overlooked and invite them to live seen by God who loves them. Whitney's writing has been featured in Encourage, Her View from Home, Proverbs 31 Ministries, and more. Whitney lives outside Atlanta, Georgia, with her husband, Eli, and their 3 crazy, beautiful kids. Hi, Whitney.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here. Your book came a little later than I normally. I'm a type A personality, and I don't necessarily read the whole book for everybody I've had on, but I do try to, get, where I would like my listeners and where I think they would get something to benefit. And I feel like that about the whole book, but I do have a couple areas I'm going to work on, we'll feed on.
Okay. Yeah.
My intent with Old School is how it goes along with my book. I was told by my writing coaches to, get a podcast going to further the story. And I speak about the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health, how we get it, but then also how we maintain it. So when I look for guests or talk to people about it or books that I like, that is the vein I'm going in. And you are right in the wheelhouse of a lot of what happened to me. I'm 60. I had some abuse when I was younger that, back then you just didn't talk about it. So not being seen, not being heard, all of that just speaks to my heart. So what I'd like to do is start off is kind of get your story about how you felt overlooked, how you came to overlooked, and then maybe follow that with a few, not the whole, we don't want to give away the farm, but a couple of your higher writing principles of how you got past that or how you got to the scene point. I really am excited about what I've read, but I want my listeners to hear it straight from the horse's mouth.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. I love that you shared your experience of being overlooked with just your story, because it's different than mine. And that's what I found with this whole theme, is that what I once thought was just something that I was struggling with has turned out to be something so many people feel, and they feel it for a whole lot of different reasons. And so for me, feeling overlooked really began a young age, because I am an introvert, but even as a child, I was very, very shy. And so I really struggled just socially. I was always behind my mom's leg, wishing we could go home and not be out in public anymore, and struggled with friend groups in elementary school and trying to fit in, just the classic story of, mean girls and finding friends and not being the popular one. And then as I got older, in high school, I really kind of latched on to trying to be the smart one. I wanted that to be my identity. But I just still felt like I was never quite the best at anything. And so I felt overlooked in my achievements. And then as I became a young adult, I got married at a young age, and we started to try to have a family, and I got diagnosed with infertility. And so then I experienced feeling overlooked and suffering, like no one could understand what I was going through. So it was sort of a new level of that feeling. And I did eventually have children. As you said in my bio, I have 3 children. Thank the Lord. That's a miracle. So anyway, I just kind of felt like this feeling, I couldn't really name it, but I felt like the feeling followed me throughout all these seasons of my life. And when I went to sort of want to write something, I was like, I want to write about that, but I don't even know what to call it. And one day I was on, just looking at words in a thesaurus, and I came across the word overlooked. And I'm not this kind of person normally, but I just started crying, because it was like, it hit me that is the word that I have felt for so long. And also, as I began to share my own feeling, I thought this was just an introvert thing or like a shy person thing, but it's not. It's for so many different seasons. It's for so many different reasons. And I just started to realize God began to open up, like, wow, this is so much more far reaching. In fact, in the book, I say that I make a bold statement to say that everybody has felt overlooked at some point in their life.
I would agree with that. I don't think there's one person who could truthfully say they haven't felt that way at some juncture.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was the feeling. And oftentimes you don't get to keep the title that you choose initially in your book proposal.
I've been told
But
that.
yeah, my publisher loved it, and we did change the subtitle. But that word overlooked was the one that was in that original book proposal that changed over and over again, and it ended up being what was on the cover of the book, because it just kind of was the ultimate feeling of the whole thing. So.
I was told that I belong to Proverbs, the Compel actually training. And I've done 2 book proposals through there. And the first one, first of all, the Lord tapped me like 10 years ago to write a book. And it started off, I thought, being my story of like healing through kind of an Esther situation. But then as I got my writing coaches, they've now shown me that maybe this first one is more memoirish and going over what I've been through, and leading into a second or third one that goes over the healing and the recovery from that. And but anyway, when I was doing the book proposal, I was like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. I'm like, Lord, I don't know that I'm ready for this one. I may pass. And he's like, no, that's what I'm teaching you. You're going to learn from doing this. No, you're not ready. You're not going to win this book proposal. You're just going to do it because that's going to teach you. And now that I have writing coaches, they talk about that too. They said, don't, have a death grip on your title. And I've even had a photo shoot for the cover. So my prayer, and the Lord has moved these things along, and everything has gone lightning fast since I got obedient about the writing. I'm hoping I break a ceiling with it, and that I be allowed to keep the title and the cover that has been shot. And if I have to self-publish to make that happen, I may. I'd like to go the traditional publishing route, but I agree with you thoroughly in regard. The way that they talked about, I think it was Tracy at Compel that did a video series on titles and stuff like that with these 2 young ladies. Her True Worth, maybe, or something was the name of their book. Anyway, that they talked about how if you were in a Barnes and Noble and they're walking by, what is going to make somebody reach over and grab your book? And I think the picture, the profile, just exactly like this, and the title, I mean, it couldn't be better to speak to, like I said, I think every single human being, regardless of age, regardless of station or anything, has felt like, does anybody even know I exist? And we like to, as Christians and as the church and what have you, talk about how, well, God knows you do, so that ought to just be enough. And I get that in theory, but in relationally here with people with skin on, it can become a little more difficult for the rubber to meet the road there. And I think you do address that. I do. I did pick and choose.
That's okay.
So I did, of course, read the foreword and the note, and then the does anybody see me? And wait, is that the title? My glasses.
That's the first chapter.
So, and then it flows all the way to, I love at the end that you do swing around because of the time you were writing this in to the social media, but like the principles that you deployed to help yourself feel seen. Because I know those are very emotional, and that's very important. And yes, while your identity in Christ has a huge part in that, or maybe the full part of that, but how did you get from the overlooked to being seen? Just a couple of, high flyers.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that it's easy to say, well, God sees me, that's enough. But it's not easy to feel that way or to really live that way. And so I think for me, it was really understanding the foundation of why I really long to be seen. That was sort of a question I set out to answer in this book. Why do I really care so much about the attention and approval of other people? And in answering that question, I think that that's where we can start from a foundation. And so it's not that we just say, God sees me, and that's enough, but it's the foundation that we start there. And then relationships can be built upon that, but they're not there to fill the need that God does. And so what I learned in my research for this book was really interesting to me, which was that psychologists describe needing attention and approval as a biological human need. And I was like, oh, this can't be right when I was researching it. This doesn't seem right. But as I researched it more and more, it is. It's just like eating or sleeping or shelter. Humans need positive attention and approval. And I think that we've gotten so used to thinking that attention is a bad thing because we often look for it in wrong ways that we forget that it's a need. And so there's even a hierarchy of human need out there. You can look it up on Google anywhere. And one of the tiers in this hierarchy, it's like a pyramid, is love and belonging, which is attention and approval. And so I think as I kind of was like processing that, I thought about my own children and how we realize that children need positive attention for their physical and emotional development. And when they don't get that, they often have attachment disorders and sometimes even delays. And this affects their actual growth and development on a real level. But I think we kind of just think like at some point that stops and we don't need that anymore as adults. Or if we do need that, we're wrong for feeling that way. But the truth is that when I found out, okay, this is not just something that I want, but it's a biological human need. I need acceptance and attention. Then the question became, well, if it's biological, then it was created by my creator. So there has to be a solution to fill it. So what does that solution look like? And so psychologists' answers were basically twofold. If I could sum it up in two things, it would be get positive attention from other people and practice more self-love, which I think have value to them and I think can help. But I struggle with those answers just in my personality type because I struggle to command attention from other people as an introvert. And when I do get sort of positive attention, I always kind of feel like I just want more. Like it doesn't necessarily satisfy, it just makes me want more. And then self-love or self-confidence or self-esteem, those are like things I've always struggled with. So I'm like, how am I supposed to just all of a sudden fix this problem when really it's the problem? The problem is the solution. And so I don't know where to start. And so as a Christian, I took this question to God's word. Like, why do I long for this? If this is a need, how is it filled? And sort of in its most basic form, we see it in Genesis 1 at the very beginning that God is creating man and woman in his image. And he has this wonderful conversation with himself as a triune God. He says, let us make man in our image. They're talking about it. And then he creates man and woman. And as he says over creation, he says over his creation of man, but he says it a little differently. He says he saw them and they were very good. And so in that very first chapter, we see God's attention and God's approval. And it just struck me that maybe this need that we've defined, okay, it's an emotional need for sure. We have an emotional need for attention. Now, psychologists have taught me it's a biological need. We have a biological need for attention and approval. But this is also a spiritual need, that we have a spiritual need for attention and approval. And when that attention and approval that's supposed to come from our creator is sort of cut off, and we begin to look at it, we begin to try to get it from other people. When we begin to try to get our worth assigned from other people, we are always at a deficit. I sort of liken it to the idea of, if you are malnourished, you don't need to eat candy to get better. Although that's something, you need vegetables and complex carbohydrates and protein. You need real food. And so that's the difference between trying to get our attention and approval from people, that'd be like candy, versus our attention and approval from our creator, which is what really sustains us. And then we can build on top of that.
I think that's awesome. I believe that completely biologically. I have had, since my divorce, I have had this quandary going back and forth. Well-intentioned Christians have said, you shouldn't be on dating apps. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do that. And it's like, they're not in my shoes, number one. And they did correct me from saying I was alone. I'm not alone. I have my creator, but I am by myself, like the skin on, because I do believe there's horizontal attention, touch, love that we should have, but not looking, like you said, for it in the wrong place. Not always, not solid candy or alcohol or drugs or sex or whatever, but that we look for it in those positive relationships that the Lord, has ordained for us to have in our life. And so I think that's awesome that I'm a science geek. So I love it that you looked this up and that you saw there absolutely is biologically, because inside us is also that desire for our creator. So we have that back and forth, the love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, love your neighbor as yourself. And they even talk in biology about how if a plant doesn't have a positive environment with good light, not fake light, of fluorescent light, and water, and if it's just a loud negative environment, that plants die. And if that is the case at the simplest form, kind of like how it talks in the Bible about he takes care of the lilies of the field, the flowers of in the field, as well as the sparrows or whatever, that that need that is created within us is going to be met by him, but he does want it supported by the horizontal layer. And I just love that. I love it when something has a science behind it, because so many people think science disproves God when it couldn't be further from the truth.
Agreed.
I did go to chapter 11, WWJP. What would Jesus post? Love that. And I would love you to talk about it, because I do feel the dichotomy of the word social media, especially coming through COVID. I wasn't, my dating came to a halt, which it wasn't dramatic at that time anyway. But the isolation that came out of that, I found myself and still struggle a little with isolating. I work at a place where there's only a couple of us and they're married. And then when I head home, or if I don't go do something social, and I'm an introverted extrovert, and then as a book writer, we're told to make a platform and get out there. And so we're looking for those followers and those likes. And my writing coach, Bob Goff, did say something to me that I thought was fascinating that I'll throw out there. And then I'd like to hear your thoughts on the whole social media truly being seen situation. But he talked about how on his podcast, he may have 2 million followers or whatever. He said, but if you look at the click-through rate, which I've looked in my analytics, it's seconds sometimes, as opposed to if you have 100 engaged followers, that he gets it, that when you go to a publisher and you fill out a book proposal, they want to see big numbers there for marketing. But the fact of the matter is if they're not engaged enough, they aren't going to go out and buy your book anyway. You know what I mean? They're just passing through because you're kind of famous. Like, he's kind of famous. Well, he's famous. So I couldn't agree more. And it is a struggle I have. And for example, recently that Threads came out. I don't know if you're familiar. Yeah. And it's not that I don't want to do it because of all the conspiracy theories of all the people who are shutting down everybody who's conservative or Christian. I just am like, really? Really? One more platform I have to go to where I'm clamoring, like you said, for the attention of people I have never met in person. So I would totally love your thoughts on that chapter and what you came to as a result of that chapter.
Yeah. So I say that social media, if you question whether people long to be seen, social media is like the proof text to prove yes, that they do, because billions of people are using it. It's skyrocketed in its use and continues to. I think it really shows us that it's touching on a human pain point. And that's that question, does anybody see me? Because at the end of the day, there are other reasons to use social media, but even when we're trying to use them for ministry or business or whatever, ultimately we're still asking, like, does anybody see me? Does anybody really care what I'm putting on here? And does anybody like it? Does anybody want it? And so that question can become really overwhelming. So like for me, I think it's a sort of similar story as what you're talking about. I didn't really care a whole lot about social media until I began the writing journey, and really didn't know much about it until a publisher told me a certain number that they would like to see and following. And I was like, okay, well, that's a goal. I'm going to reach it. And in trying to just push forward to reach that goal, I sort of lost myself. And instead of posting things on social media for a ministry or to encourage people or whatever, it was just like, how many followers and likes and data can I get from this post to further me toward a goal, when the goal all along was to write to encourage people, even ultimately in a book, that's the goal. And so I just, I got to a point, and I say it in the book, it's very embarrassing, but I try to say this just to kind of be vulnerable and honest, that I got to a point where I was just like ugly crying with my husband. And I told him, social media is a mountain in front of everything I want in my life, and it will keep me from achieving all of it. And at some point I really believed that, and it's pitiful. It's so sad. And
No.
God has shown me that's not true, but I think sometimes we start to believe that. And so it may not be in a business sense or in a ministry sense, but even I think about a younger generation in a friendship sense, where the stakes for friendships are so much higher and broader, and for being loved and being an influencer and all these things. It's just it's wild what someone can accomplish now. Like, anyone can be a celebrity. You could be a high school student now and be a internet celebrity, or a stay-at-home mom and be an internet celebrity. And so the stakes are so high for so many people, and that feels like where we're going to get our worth, right? Social media is a wonderful place to go to try to find your worth if you're looking for it in the wrong place. And so for me, I got to a point where I was just like, wait a minute, what I'm doing here, I've really lost my way. I've really lost the purpose behind why I'm doing this. And so for me, it was sort of going back to reconsider. I named the title WWJP, What Would Jesus Post? Not because I think Jesus would necessarily use social media. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. I don't know.
I think he
but
does
because I
through
really
us.
wanted to ask the question. Yeah, exactly. If he's in us, right? So we have the Holy Spirit. I really want to ask the question, how do I show up in a way on social media that honors him? And I mean, if you look at what I was doing on the outside, it would, because it was all, Christian posts and whatever. But if you were looking at my heart, it wasn't. And so it was, how do I honestly assess how to honor him on social media? And so for me, it really kind of looked like putting up some boundaries for myself and setting some safety things in place, because I just realized that my heart was really vulnerable to like go into a bad place with social media. So I started to do some really simple things, like take a day off a week from social media. I just don't get on Sundays. I just Sabbath from social media specifically, don't get on it. And it's wonderful. It takes a little, it's like I realize that my fingers are programmed to just open Instagram or whatever, I just do it without thinking. And so on that day, I really have to be intentional and think, I'm not going to do that today. I really begin to just pray about what I posted instead of thinking this is going to be great. I would just pray, God, what do you want? What content do you want me to do? And when do you want me to stop? And realizing that it's okay to take a break is a big one, because if that FOMO, feeling that fear of missing out, and feels like we step away, we're never going to achieve what we set out to achieve. And what's been really beautiful, and this isn't true for everyone, but what's been really beautiful in my personal struggle with social media is that God kind of bypassed social media numbers and gave me a book contract regardless. And I think that was just something personal to my heart that showed, yes, it's good. It's good to have the following and do the things. But like you said, that real engagement with real hearts and real people is far better than the little likes and the little hearts that we get on a screen. And that's really what matters ultimately.
Absolutely. I think the process can be completely overwhelming. I mean, I truthfully, when I'm 60, and if somebody would have told me last year that I would be doing what I'm doing this year, I would have thought they were smoking something special. But everything I've been asked to do this year has been uncomfortable and growing, and it's been so fun. I have had no thought process, literally, going into this podcast of anyone listening, other than like my friends who are around me or whoever my guest is or something like that. And that has been so freeing, because I am the type A to-do list personality that could sit down and let myself get lost in the process. Okay, I need to get this person scheduled, and I need to write these show notes, and I need to, put it on different platforms so people see that it's coming. And while those are all very well and good, and I do need to do those for a podcast, it's now I'm sitting in that space that's just fun for me. I am having a good time. I'm not letting it take over my day. I've literally slotted it in like my morning quiet time. I have a time of day where I deal with those things. And it's not that I don't look at social media at other times of day, but I do like limit myself so that I don't make this not fun. This is supposed to be helping me get my story out there until my book is ready. And so for me, this has been so much fun, and I'm a lifetime learner. So I love having folks on who give me just something interesting, a new, twist on different things, or how they were brought by the Holy Spirit to a lesson. And I couldn't agree with you more about the mountain being there. And a lot of people put that mountain there on their own, because I could have started a podcast and then be thinking, well, how come I don't have Joe Rogan's numbers? And I'm like, and I really think it's kind of funny, because yes, he is famous and stuff, but if you watch his podcast, he's sitting there with a blunt and this other guy over there, and they haven't really done their makeup or their hair, and they're just kind of chatting. So why isn't that very viable for people who would be in the lane of overlooked, or what I'm going to be walking through my story? Because in a room full of 100 people, at least 90 of them have walked a fair portion of my journey without being able to get it out there or talk about it. Now, there's a ton of books about people going through abuse, but I'm talking about a very specific, different, ability for people to understand how someone thinks that's happened to as well. So I absolutely love your book, and I will finish the whole thing, but in time for our podcast, I was like, okay. One of the other authors I had on, she goes, you read the whole book for the people who come on? I go, well,
that's commitment. That's good.
I just don't want it to be, I want what the lesson that I want you to impart to be applicable to me too, and not just like the evening news.
Right, exactly. Right. That's
okay,
good.
So the last thing I like to do with all of my guests is, because it's old school, and I feel everyone's older than someone, that's kind of my tagline, is, and you're young, but I feel like anybody from 20 to 80 can get some really cool stuff. And I have gotten some great nuggets so far, and I only started in May. But I would like just the one thing that you wish you had known sooner that you could impart on our listeners.
The one thing I wish I would have known sooner in my life was that when I hid myself away from other people out of fear for what they would think about me, or fear for them to see my weaknesses, or fear of being an awkward introvert like I often am, I was also hiding myself away from being used by God. And I didn't realize it, because God uses us in relationship with people. So if I'm not being willing to be seen and interact and be vulnerable with people, there's very little God's going to be able to do through my life. And so I wished I would have realized that opening up and being vulnerable with God as that foundation to lean back on is a really beautiful thing. And you get to meet a lot of people, and you get to know that you're not alone. And you get to realize that we're all just humans with a whole lot of weaknesses, and you're not the only one feeling that way. And so I've spent my life building a lot of walls to hide myself, and I want to spend the rest of my life tearing walls down.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. I'm not quite sure how old you are. I'm going to say young 30s, maybe.
Or mid 30s.
Yeah. But if somebody were to, truly stop and get that grip and learn that lesson early on, and hopefully if they want to pick up overlooked, they can hear that too. But there are people in their 40s, 50s, 60s who weren't given any kind of feedback around them to not be anything other than protective of what has already happened to them, even if they love the Lord and have a great relationship with him. It's hard to break, like you said, those walls that have been invented for protection. I had, relationship after relationship have infidelity, have break of trust. And I don't ever, and I didn't even with the abuse I got as a child, believe that any of that was God's doing, that it was the evil of those individuals. And I never put that evil on the next human that was in my life. I didn't want to believe that every human was going to do this kind of thing. And I don't believe that, but I believe we have the propensity to. And so we have to get past sort of that and realize that, yes, if we're going to have a purpose, and if we're going to let someone understand this very thing that's hurtful and what we perceive as a weakness out there, and our story out there, the only way that's going to happen is if we get uncomfortable, and if we break our introverted extrovert stuff.
Right.
So this is awesome, Whitney. I'm so glad we were able to work this out. I think, they tell you on book proposals not to say that everyone's your audience, but I beg to differ with your book. I think male, female, Christian, non-believer, no, faith-based. It really has such great stuff for them to stop and at least take a look at maybe where we're looking for that being seen, because most of that is going to be the harm more than even our internal thinking, I think. So I am really grateful that you were able to come here today. I want to thank you for coming to class and teaching us. And if any of you would like to connect with Whitney, I'll have all of her connection information in the show notes. If you want to get her book, that information will be there, as well as her website. And my connection information too, if you want to email Michele@michellevrabel.com to get any other information, or maybe where Whitney might be speaking or doing some other things, or if she has other books in the pipeline, you can connect through the show notes. And I just want to ask that you go take a listen and you review after you've listened. Give me a good review. No. And I thank you for coming to class, and class dismissed.